I was born twice, once under the Heavenly Emperor's fury, and once with a sword in my chest. Steel arrives before memory. A flat, clean pane presses between the ribs, the platform slides under my feet, someone's laughter breaks to near and then breaks again as there buckles around me. Robes snap like flags. A ring of faces recoils. The world steadies, and so do I. They later decide it was killing intent. They can call it whatever they like. I call it the night I carried out of eternal retribution cliff, the night that follows even in daylight. The sword leaves me with a hush. Blood warms my shirt, not hot, not cold, simply present. The man who planted the blade sinks to his knees and keeps sinking until a platform stops him. His eyes are open, but the fight left them a moment before I did anything at all. An elder brushes dust from the air with one palm as he lands on the stage. No tremor in the wrist. Good balance. He studies me as if reading a line that may disappear. He asks my name without moving his mouth as much as the question deserves. I give it. Su Yang. No one here has a reason to recognize it. Perfect. I have 10 days to find a pure young flower, and the points to buy it from the White Pearl Treasury, or the thing I brought back will finish what the sword began. 10 days to turn a borrowed body with a public reputation for failure into a ledger that finally balances. I step off the platform. The arena dust smells of cold stone and hot breath. Somewhere behind me, the judge declares the bout concluded, the victor uninjured, the loser carried away. The words arrive like flags on a wind I do not feel. I do not turn. I count my breaths for the first time since the cliff. On 8, the pain finds a place to sit. On 10, it behaves. The outer court watches from its shade. Curiosity moves through them like a slow wave, cresting where rumors are born. A junior attendant edges near, weighing the risk of speaking to what he cannot name. He points with his chin the way the poor learn to point. Toward the intake hall, toward the lines of bamboo slips that keep the sex economy from pretending not to be one. I go where his chin points. The intake hall keeps time with other people's needs. A long table, a lacquered box for grievances, a drum that hasn't been struck this season. I find the slip that lists my standing. It is as I recall from the memories living under my own. Low enough to be a joke, steady enough to be a rumor. A clerk with a voice like damp rain recites the rules about points, penalties, and the White Pearl Treasury's weekly auction. The important part arrives last and soft. Nothing rare moves without a sponsor. I ask how many points the pure young flower drew last auction. He consults a square of oiled paper, then decides I mean something else entirely, and tells me the flower went for more than anyone sane would pay. When he sees that I heard what he actually said, he adds that sanity is not a rule written anywhere that matters. I thank him with silence. He doesn't mind. Outside, the sky is a poor copy of blue. The outer court terraces step down toward the market lane. Stalls open and close with the rhythm of small ambition. I recognize the feeling. I also recognize what I need. A door that does not yet exist. A sign that can be read from the corner of an eye. A reason for people to cross the empty space between what hurts and what can be mended. There is an unused colonnade tucked behind the bath minus, house where steam gives the airway. The stone floor is warm from pipes that never learned to keep to themselves. I sweep the place with my foot until a square shows itself. Quiet, shaded, present, without asking. A broom leans where no one remembers leaving it. I use it. In time, a rectangle of floor looks like it has a purpose. It does. The sign is a thought before it is words. Heavenly clinic. Not a sect hole, not a physician's brag, not a promise of miracles. A place that's a just site, or you can leave through the same day you arrive, lighter by something you were tired of carrying. I lace thread through bamboo and hang the sign from the colonnade beam. The first patient is the wing. The second is a man with a shoulder that forgot how to be his. He wears the robe of a labor crew and the expression of someone who has accepted pain as a permanent tenant. I let him stand until the standing speaks for him. Guarding, compensating, the elbow pressed a fraction toward the ribs. He smells of iron dust and clean sweat. He asks if I do bone minus setting. I tell him I do breath minus setting and bone will follow if bone wants to. He accepts that because the hurting way to live has already taught him the value of trying something that doesn't have a name. I do not touch him first. I ask him to breathe the way a bell would if it could. To be round at the edges, to swing as far on the exhale as on the inhale, to let momentum do the work where intention would only grip and drag. When his breath stops marching and begins to describe a circle, I let my hand find the heat along his scapula, the place where sweat cooled too early, where the fascia holds on like a landlord. The first contact is not much. Weight without pressure. A suggestion of direction. The muscle decides to listen after pretending not to. He tries his. He sighs like a boar done warping. I make a slow line with my thumb along the small ridge that pain built under his skin. His breath meets my thumb halfway. The shoulder drops a finger minus width without either of us asking it to. When I step back, he rolls his arm once, twice. Surprise finds his face first, then relief, then suspicion that he will be charged more for the surprise than the relief. I tell him the price is a story. I ask how he injured it. He speaks of a winch that caught in of a friend who did not get out from under in time. He doesn't say the word guilt. He doesn't have to. It lives in the place my thumb pressed. I take the story, make space for it beside us, and say that breath and guilt do not share rooms well. He nods like he had always known and had only forgotten, as the body often does. Payment arrives the way small payments do. Ingratitude in a rumor that will be misremembered into a legend by evening, in 3 copper chits that the sect is happy to exchange for points provided no one needs the points more than the sect does. I accept the chits anyway. I am 10 days away from a flower that costs more than copper understands. By afternoon, relief smells like steam. The bath minus how Stearns out a queue with the same hunger the market does. A woman in a gray mantle asks if the clinic takes women. She asks it the way people ask questions to which they already know the answer. I tell her adults are welcome. She untees the mantle, revealing a robe the color of sky just before heat and a right wrist wrapped in a strip torn from that same sky. She does not offer her name. I do not ask for it. Names have their uses. This moment is not one of them. Her wrist shows a clean swelling just above the joint, the kind that arrives when ki outpaces blood and decides to set up its own border crossing. I ask about her practice. She speaks of long hours, a new form that promises a breakthrough, a teacher who says endurance is devotion wearing its true clothes. She smiles when she says teacher and then doesn't. I guide her to the shadowed edge of the colonnade, where light filters through leaves and forgets to be harsh. I ask her to sit, to let the forearm tell its story with weight instead of words. The tissue is firm because it tried to protect itself. I instruct the breath to lengthen at the top, to hold the mountain for 1 beat before descent. I let palm and thumb shape a small river along extensor muscle fibers that have been yelling so long they forgot how to speak. She flinches once, not from pain but from the moment the pattern breaks. The instant a signal has to decide whether to continue pretending or admit the message changed. We stay with that. The swelling softens at the edges, then recedes toward the joint as if reconsidering its lease. I show her the smallest range to move through, a careful hinge inside which the error can correct itself. Heat blooms, not the flushed heat of embarrassment, not the angry heat of inflammation. Something steadier, older, the warmth of a room that knows you are there and makes space accordingly. She exhales through her nose and rests her head against the beam for a heartbeat. When she opens her eyes, they are clear from the center outward. She tightens the sash herself. The mantle returns to the shoulders like a decision reached without drama. Her thanks is a nod that says she expected exactly this and is pleased to find her prediction accurate. Payment is a white token I have not yet seen. A sponsor's chit. She places it on my palm and leaves before my surprise learns to form a question. I turn the token over. On one side, an emblem, a blossom rendered with too many petals to be made by a lazy hand. On the other, the single stamped word, credit. I do not like gifts shaped like debts. I pocket it anyway. By evening, the bamboo slip that marks my standing has moved by a rung and a half. Numbers do not improve themselves. Someone improved them for me. I consider who benefits and decide it scarcely matters tonight. The clinic has a door now that people step through without looking both ways. The steam has become a friend. The sign swings less when no one stares at it. The sect changes at night without changing anything at all. Voices lower but carry farther. Lamps narrow, which make shadows honest. I walk the outer cliff path because the body insists on motion after a day of other people's stillness. The hand that placed the sign remembers the weight of the sword and finds the rail as if that memory were transferable. The point of the evening is to feel where the breath has scratched itself to know whether the night I carried broke skin again. Halfway along the path, a figure leans on the parapet and does not pretend not to wait for me. Broad shoulders, the sort affected by people who like being seen to lift things. Hair bound with a red cord that means something to the man wearing it and to those who need a reason to nod when he passes. He greets me by naming my victory in the arena and then praises my restraint while naming the man I did not kill. He has the voice of someone who didn't think of the line himself, but will own it if it earns him anything. He asks whether the clinic intends to treat inner court disciples. He phrases it like a compliment. It is not one. It is a test of where I place my feet when people draw lines on the floor. I answer that the clinic intends to treat adults who breathe. He laughs with his mouth only. He gives his name as Renku Ilin and his title as something that matters at night and not at noon. He flicks his gaze toward the bath minus house sieves as if the eaves belonged to him. He mentions sponsors in the way a farmer mentions weather after counting the clouds he purchased. I ask whether the weather will be fair for 10 days. He likes that I understood the question under the question. He likes it less that I answered with neither a promise nor a plea. He bids me sleep lightly. The courtesy is correctly shaped and wrong at the edges. After he leaves, the night grows larger by the precise amount of space he no longer occupies. I watch stars that do not care that anyone watches them and decide they are good company. The path returns me to the colonnade. A novice has left 2 jars of broth and a note weighted by a small stone. For the hands that do not tremble, the handwriting belongs to the kind of person who is careful without knowing yet why. I drink half the broth because the body remembers it as a body and not a theory of one. The breath meets me halfway to sleep. The night waits as nights do when they recognize their own. Morning arranges itself into a queue before anyone asks it to. The clinic's third day finds a man whose lips are too pale and whose pulse whispers the wrong language. Poison sits in the soft fold between thumb and forefinger, a little kingdom ruled by a poor idea. He claims he ate nothing strange. His eyes move when he says it. I name 3 common herbs and a less common leaf. He blinks at the third. No accusation rises, there is no time for it. I heat water until steam is a hand. I steep a countering tea and cool it to a temperature that will not ask his stomach for attention. I needle a web between digits with a breath minus length of pressure, just shy of pain, just shy of panic, until blood blushes where it had no plans to. The color in his lips considers returning, then it does. He thanks me with the look of a person who knows they miscalculated and is grateful to be permitted more arithmetic. He promises payment when the market opens. I tell him the price includes never again for the leaf. He nods and departs with the slot where danger sat still warm and empty. By noon, I have points enough to buy things the morning version of me could not. I also have a new problem. People are beginning to watch not because they need help, but because they wish to be seen needing help or offering it. Attention is a debt minus harvester with good shoes. I adjust the sign. Hours shorten. The line grows more honest. The woman in the sky, Ines-colored robe returns just before closing and takes up a position at the beam as if she has always leaned there. She says her teacher revised his opinion of endurance. She reports that her wrist did not swell even when form became obsession. The words are plain, but the relief behind them is not. I ask whether the teacher's revision included an apology. She smiles with her eyes first and then does not smile at all, which communicates more usefully. She presents a ledger line, a favor offered in exchange for nothing, not credit, access. She will introduce me to a sponsor who will not ask for my name in return. She says the sponsor collects interest in forms other than coin. She says the sponsor admires clinics that open in places where steam makes people remember they are made of heat and water. I accept the introduction because the flower still waits with a price that refuses to be shy. The meeting happens on a terrace above the practice yards, screened by white curtains that move as if they have their own ideas about wind. The sponsor uses a fan as if conversation were a fire and the right amount of air keeps it living without letting it run. Their gender is the kind that gives onlookers more questions than comfort. Their age is the kind that makes both answers plausible when none are offered. They do not name themselves, they ask what the clinic wants. I give it. The pure young flower, 10 days. A ledger that has to balance or a body that will stop. They ask what I will pay besides points. They ask it the way the sect asks for a vow, lightly so that the weight is all the listeners. I pay with a promise of outcomes. Adults who rise from the clinic less at war with themselves, fighters who damage less when they win, teachers who learn a word older than discipline. They consider whether such currency spends in places they care about. The fans lows. They grant access to the White Pearl Treasury's auction platform, the one under the platform ordinary people are permitted to stand on. They do not promise success. They do not ask how I learn it to move key with a hand. They do not ask why the night follows me. I like the shape of their questions. The token in my pocket becomes 2. A line of credit turns into a corridor. I am allowed to walk once. I leave the terrace with the sense of a gate that has agreed to be a door for me precisely when I need it. Or luck is the polite name for such timing. I have never trusted polite names. I trust preparation wearing luck's clothes. On the 5th morning, an inner court disciple arrives with a training form that chews at the seams of his breath. He is the kind of strong that broke something once and chose to grow around it rather than through it. His hips weld rather than hinge. His spine lies to his shoulders lie to his hands. His voice has the confidence of injuries that handicap everyone else in the room. He asks for the shortcut. I do not sell shortcuts. I demonstrate a hinge that is not a hinge but a memory of one. The smallest curve the lumbar spine can remember without reaching for help. He laughs until the pattern catches his laugh by the throat and makes it useful. Sweat darkens his sash in the places the old injury hid. He goes quiet. He moves inside the square I drew for him as if the square were an entire province and he needed a passport. When he leaves a stake rather than a token. His house name sits on the top of it like a weather vane. I accept something more valuable than points. Time in which no official will decide the clinic is a jurisdictional error. He has purchased me procedure. Procedure is a wall that corrupt people have to walk around rather than through. The sign comes down for a single afternoon while I close my eyes on a mat that remembers other backs. I follow the breath into the place beneath pain where information lives, unafraid. The night tests the door. It finds it shut, not locked, not barred, simply shut by someone who knows how to open it. I open it a finger minus width and watch what stands there. It is not an enemy. It is the memory of weight. It needs a home. I give it one where it will not trip anyone else. When I rise, the bamboo slip in the intake hall has climbed again. The clerk with the damp voice remarks without looking up that sponsors breed faster than rabbits and some of them bite. I reply that I keep good fences. He smiles into his scroll, which is his way of admitting the joke landed. Evening draws color out of the stone. The bath house empties and fills with a slower tide. I close the clinic early because the auction is tonight. The white pearl treasury lights its lamps in a pattern that tells people how much they should pretend to be impressed. The front hall holds who like to be seen bidding. The lower holds those who like to be believed invisible. I take the stairs that lead neither up nor down, the stairs tucked behind a pillar with a crack running its length like an honest scar. The steward who does not introduce himself guides me through a door that opens before his hand reaches it. Inside, the room smells of sandalwood and iron coin. The auctioneer sits behind the lattice as if modesty were a commodity. Butts blur to one another when you are not buying them. Names wrap themselves around roots and oars and leaves that can kill if asked politely. I sit on my hands and commit to silence. Patience builds a heat under the ribs that wants to be mistaken for impatience. The pure young flower arrives without fanfare, which is the loudest kind of fanfare. The audience rearranges its posture in a single and scripted movement. I feel attention angle itself like a blade. The opening call is a number that makes the clerk's damp voice sound like prophecy. I do not bid. Bidding early is a way to volunteer information about one's appetite. I eat differently. Hands lift. Fans twitch. Tokens change color. A house I recognize from the hinged disciple stake raises the stakes without changing its face. Another house rises to meet it because people who inherit money keep score the way people who inherit hunger keep leftovers. When the room tastes close to its ceiling, I show the steward both tokens and the permission that is not a permission but a mark of having asked the right person the right question in the right tone. The steward passes the information through the lattice like a ghost passing a wall. Numbers slow. Someone decides they have better things to buy than immortality in a vase. Someone else decides to pretend they never wanted it. The hammer falls. It sounds like two pieces of wood admitting they are both wood. The room exhales. I hold still. Exhaling too soon is an admission you forget you're being watched. Paperwork is a slower battle than any I fought in the arena. Stamp, stamp, seal, seal. Names that will never meet are placed on lines that barely intersect. I accept that ritual is a lubricant and the treasury enjoys watching wheels turn. The flower arrives in a box that thinks too well of itself. I open it with a respect, do a thing that can kill anyone who wishes to be careless. The flower does not glow, it only remembers light so well that the room feels brighter. I do not touch the petals. I do not need to. The breath changes near it, as if the ribs remembered they were once a cage and then remember why they opened. The steward offers congratulations the way one might offer a towel. Useful, clean, anonymous. I nod. The knight follows me out. It does not press. It accompanies. On the steps, Rinkyuilin smiles as if he'd been smiling long enough to be believed. He remarks that the clinic rises quickly. He wonders aloud whether speed offends the gods. He watches my hands as if waiting for them to tremble. I let them be still. I ask whether he lost a bit. His smile folds and then Ray folds into something that fits better. He mentions the arena again, the sword, the laughter that stopped. He cannot decide whether to admire or resent. He chooses a third thing, to promise that accidents happen near cliffs. I agree. They do. I wish him a safe walk and take the long way home. Back at the colonnade, the sign moves in a wind that the Bath Minus house does not share. The beam remembers the weight of the woman's head for a moment before the memory dissolves. The mat holds my back without asking for a fee. I arrange the box and the breath between my knees. The clinic has taught me to hold miracles the way one holds a bowl, steady with fingers that know where to stop. I do not eat the flower. I sit with it until the knight bends closer the way a tutor bends when a pupil finally asks the right question. The question is not about power. It is about proportion. What lies under my sternum needs to meet this light and agree on a ratio. I breathe until inhale and exhale are two sides of the same coin. I let the flower's presence inform the circle without forcing it. Heat climbs the spine as if remembering steps it learned in another life. The skull opens a window, the way a house does on the first warm evening in a hard season. Sweat collects where it should. Tremor never arrives. When the time is true, I measure a dose not with fingers, but with the quiet that arrives when math and mercy match. The body receives what I ask it to. The night recedes by one room. My hands cool. The clinic becomes a place that can stay standing even if I leave it for a day. The breath counts without being told to. 10 days have become 9, then 8. I will need all of them. The sect loves to test doors by seeing what walks in uninvited. On cue, a pebble ticks the stone at the edge of the colonnade. A folded note leans against it. The handwriting is careful in a new way. Someone took pains to make the letters belong to no one. The message is brief. Audit announced, B-ring, tomorrow. Audits do not arrive for clinics of my size unless someone insists. Someone has insisted. Good. We were going to meet sooner or later. Sooner gives me time to plan. I bank the lamps low. The flower sleeps the way cold fire does. The sign keeps its counsel. I lie on the mat and let the ribs remember the ocean that put them here. Sleep does not arrive as an enemy. It arrives as a cousin with news. Tomorrow they will measure what cannot be measured and pretend the numbers mean something simple. I will give them something to measure that does. The night escorts me to shore. The audit arrives with a chord instead of a knock. 3 notes. The drum at intake, the clack of seal minus wood, the whisper of robes that belong to people who enjoy being announced by air. B minus ring means a vestibule that pretends to be a room halfway between the sex's public face and the rooms where faces are not required. A placard hangs beside the doorway with letters to clean for honest work. Audit in progress. The font is designed to make people stand straighter than they mean to. I stand straighter than I mean to. 2 auditors and a scribe. The first carries authority the way some people carry a bad shoulder, noticeable even when they try to hide it. The second has the stillness of a blade wrapped in cloth. The scribe's brush moves before eyes finish reading. Efficient hands. Good. Efficiency leaves less space for invention. They request records. I present slips. Consent marks, adult status affirmations. Intake notes so clean even suspicion would be embarrassed to smudge them. They read quickly and in different ways, which means they have practiced disagreeing without moving their mouths. The blade minus in minus cloth asks what heavenly clinic treats when it treats. Breath and bone, I say. Key that forgot its lame. Pain that thinks it pays rent. She asks if I practice dual cultivation. I ask if she is auditing a clinic or a rumor. The scribe writes that down. Ink shines like a small river before it dries. They requested demonstration. Of course they do. Audits measure what can be seen. The things that fix the scene cannot be seen without believing in them first. A patient waits because there is always a patient when power needs an example. A man in his 30s, the kind of strong that knows how to lift crates without bragging about it. His right leg lags half a step behind his spirit. He denies pain and the denial is the place that hurts. I do not reach for him. I ask him to step, as if the ground had opinions. The hip does the talking that the mouth refused. The auditors watch from a distance that lets them claim impartiality while enjoying the view. Wait, I tell the man without saying the word. He nods. Breath rounds. I draw a small square on the floor with chalk the color of old clouds. Walk the edges, I ask without asking, and tell me where the corners disappear. The first corner is gone before he arrives. I tap air where bone forgot to be helpful. The leg remembers that it's attached to a spine that can speak. The corner returns. He chose along the seam of his sash. The eye follows where the auditor's gaze stops. No needles. No thunder. No names from books that like hearing themselves. A thumb finds the tendon that defensive men invite to stay tight. It chooses not to. He steps again. The lag is a rumor someone told yesterday. The blade minus in minus cloth allows herself the smallest shift in weight, the kind people permit only when their bodies are impressed and wish to inform the rest of them. The authority with the bad shoulder asks for the next file. I give them a wrist that learned obsession the week it mistook ambition for devotion. The sky, minus colored robe waits in the doorway, mantle folded on one arm. She nods once to say adult and consent and public demonstration are compatible ideas. The auditors note her age without looking at her eyes. They ask about her teacher. She supplies a name that changes the temperature of the room by a half degree. Good. Names like that are households you can borrow a ladder from if you return it clean. We do not perform for them. We work. Breath expands at the top and bottom. The hinge takes a circle the size of a coin. My palm, warm from the man's hip, becomes a calm weight above the X in a ridge that shouted itself hoarse and then mistook silence for wisdom. He twarms the cloth wrap, then her skin beneath, then the stubborn quiet at the joint. She moves through a range so modest even pride cannot object, and the range answers with relief that plants its feet. The scribe writes more slowly now, as if the brush had to adjust to the idea of recording something that resists declaring itself a miracle. The audit ends as audits end, without admitting that it ended. The authority folds the slips as if folding them could make the day behave. The blade minus in minus cloth appraises the sign that made it or where there was a colonnade. She remarks on jurisdiction without remarking on it, then asks for a license number I do not have because the clinic did not exist long enough to own one. Procedure arrives to save me. The hinged disciple's stake in my favor slides across the table like a polite avalanche. Behind it, the sponsor's token travels without touching the wood. The two together build a corridor that neither auditor wishes to walk through and cannot pretend not to see. They issue a provisional sanction with a 10-day window attached like a polite threat. In 10 days, they expect paperwork to name what practice is already done. In 10 days, they expect the clinic to either stand with a number or sit down with an apology. 10 days. The same number the flower requires. The world enjoys symmetry even when people don't. They leave the way rain leaves. Nothing dramatic, but wet footprints anyway. The placard remains for an hour after they go, the way a story lingers when people pretend it doesn't. Renku ill and appears when all proper witnesses have properly dispersed. He treats the B- ring like a patio he paid for. He observes that inspections make honest shops more honest and other shops quieter. He wonders aloud which kind the heavenly clinic is. His eyes enjoy the lattice as if he brought it. I let him finish enjoying it. Then I ask whether he arranged the patient with the backward corner. He smiles into the space between us and answers a different question about the weather. We agree that the cliff is beautiful this time of year. We agree that accidents keep happening near it. The sky minus-colored robe returns the mantle to her shoulders as if ending a conversation I did not hear. She thanks the auditors for their time without looking at them because they are no longer here. She tells me the sponsor enjoyed the demonstration and the fan moved only once. She does not explain what that means. She does not need to. The clinic reopens. People arrive with problems that believe urgency is the same as importance. I try it. Urgency sits. Importance moves. The line shrinks without noticing. Money becomes points, points become leverage, leverage becomes air. At dusk, the bath minus house exhales steam like a dragon with manners. The colonnade swallows footsteps. I count chits and minutes. The ledger looks less like a cliff than a small thing that pretends to be nothing. A boy in courier gray, 18 by a month and proud of all the days, places a weighted string on the beam and flees the way messengers do when someone told them not to be recognized. The weight is a coin. The coin is marked with a sigil I saw once in a book that liked me less after I closed it. The message is a challenge written with a brush that wanted to be a knife. Arena, 2 days. A form of Renku Ilin's choosing. Stakes declared at dawn. The handwriting wants to look official and resents how much it enjoys the drama. I consider decline. Decline is a word that buys time at the price of reputation. Reputation is a wall and a target. I file the thought with other thoughts that do not pay as well as they cost. The sky my niece colored robe reads over my shoulder without stepping that close. Her breath remains her own. She suggests, without saying, suggest, that some forms chosen by some men at night are illegal by day. She suggests, without saying, suggest, that daylight is attainable if one arranges witnesses and writes letters to the right doors. I ask the steam whether it will remember this conversation. Steam makes poor witnesses. The mantle nods anyway and departs to gather something that sounds like chance and is not. Night breaks itself into hours with a gentler hand than the day. I take the pure young flower from its box the way a captain takes the sky from a window. Grateful, wary, unwilling to mistake access for ownership. I do not feed it to my need. I let need sit at the edge of the mat and learn manners. Breath takes 40 counts to cross the river between ribs. At 20, the spine warms. At 30, he finds the old place where the sword passed and writes a different letter there. At 40, the room grows an inch wider because the body decided to stop guarding space that no longer requires it. I sleep with the box by my left hand and note under a stone. Morning hammers again. Stakes declare themselves in front of the arena line, a ceremony for people who like ceremony very much. Renku Ilin's steward reads aloud a form that favors weight and collision, the kind of fight that flatters men who learn it to be iron before they learn it to be water. He smiles as if he invented falling. My steward is a clerk with a damp voice who hates mornings and loves rules. He produces paperwork brighter than anyone's smile. He names my right to name, the ground, and the time. He names the presence of auditors who, for reasons that look like procedure, stand where they can hear everything without admitting they came to listen. He names a sponsor with a fan that is both present and not, which is how gods and donors prefer to be. I choose the ground. A circle drawn into sand heated by morning sun, not stone that turns falls into sentences. I choose the time. Late enough that heat loosens pride. I choose a condition that does not flatter iron. Points for control, not damage. Victory defined by movement granted, not pain inflicted. The scribe has to sharpen the brush to write that cleanly. The crowd enjoys the novelty and pretends to resent the lack of blood. Renku Ilin accepts the form because refusing would make him look like a man who needs stone to win. We bow the way people bow, when the bow is a contract. He opens with a weight meant to end thought. I let it pass, and ask the sand to remember it. Feet draw circles smaller than attention can follow. Hands show him corners where his form insisted on straight lines. The first point arrives not with a strike, but with a step that takes his balance for half a breath and returns it altered, like a cup refilled with a different river. He adjusts. Good. People who cannot adjust are furniture. We trade heat for information. I give him the hinge he refused yesterday and accept the shoulder I knew he would overtax to keep his pride from sweating in public. The arena murmurs when murmuring pays less than noise but more than silence. The auditors do not murmur. They count. Renku Ilin tries the old solution when new ones fail. Force. Force makes a sound that honest and knows how to swallow. I let him hear that sound until he hears himself in it. Then I take the breath at his navel with a palm that weighs nothing and everything, and the force he meant for me travels through me into ground that owes me a favor. He drops a knee. Not a full. A truth told to himself where others can see it. I step back the width of courtesy to let the truth stand. Points stally. Control beats damage without needing to bleed to prove it. The last exchange ends not with applause but with the kind of quiet that people call respect when they want to spend it later. Renkuilin rises at once because lingering would say something he does not wish to say. He nods with his mouth. His eyes file the moment under grievances he can afford. The auditors stamp their approval with ink that smells faintly of citrus and iron. The clerk enjoys the smell. He announces that provisional sanction remains in good standing and that the arena owes the Heavenly Clinic 1/2 day of freedom from ramp inspections. He is pleased by the phrase. I am pleased by the time. The sky minus colored robe stands beside the beam again by evening. Her wrist is quiet as a pond. She reports that the sponsor's fin did not move in that language. It means hunger satisfied, interest alive. She places a list on the beam. Suppliers who do not overcharge when they are watched, rules that grow teeth in certain rooms, names of doors that open to people who pronounce the right silences between words. I accept the list. I accept that help is a ledger. Night returns with its honorable habits. I sit with the flower again and do not ask it to solve my problems. I ask it to show me their correct size. Problems grow or shrink to fit the breath. Tonight, they shrink exactly enough that I can see around them. On the 9th day, the clinic treats a woman whose back learned to be a wall, a man whose pulse flutters when he hears his father's name, an elder who refuses to admit that grief is heavier than stone. Relief pays poorly in coin and richly in rumor. Rumor buys more of the exact kind of trouble I can use. On the 8th, a letter arrives that smells faintly of ashen incense. It is an invitation to a library that only exists at noon. People who loan books at noon mean to test your posture. I will go and stand how they want me to until it pays to stand how I am. On the 7th, a boy, 18 and 2 months now, proud of both, brings broth and never looks at the flower box. I decide he will live long if he keeps that habit. On the 6th, the audit returns with a new face and a familiar brush. They dislike the word clinic when the word hall would bring me under a different set of teeth. I keep clinic because doors that open to everyone need names that do not ask for bows. On the 5th, Renkuilin does not send a challenge. He sends to clients with shoulders that lie about their pasts. I fix both. He learns that mercy has a ledger too. On the 4th, the sponsor's fan moves once, and a permit arrives that says the Treasury will not question my access for reasons it has chosen not to name. The box feels lighter without moving. On the 3rd, the intake clerk asks whether I intend to hire apprentices. The map behind him tells me the question is also an offer. I consider the shape of a door that can remain open when I am somewhere else doing work only I can do. On the 2nd, the sky minus colored robe tells me her teacher wishes to watch me work without being seen to watch me. I tell her the colonnade has space for honesty and for people who cannot afford it. She hears the yes under the yes. On the last morning before the 10, I close the clinic for 1 hour that belongs to no one. The breath counts without me. The night it's where I put it and does not scratch. The flower glows without light and asks a single question with the innocence only power can air. Ready? I answer by standing. The hour ends the way a door opens. From one side and then the other. 10 days are not a lifetime. They are enough to start pretending to be one. The ledger is not even. It is a live. The audit will return with a stamp that either weighs me down or holds me up. Renkuilin will smile as if he invented gravity. The sponsor will move a fan once or not at all. The sky will copy blue honestly if the weather allows. I hang the sign. Heavenly Clinic. The words look back at me as if they have always been there waiting for someone to say them aloud. Noon folds the sect into a simpler shape. The library that does not exist before or after opens where a courtyard pretends to be empty. White flags hang like held breaths. A gate that is not there becomes there when you decide to walk through it. Shelves make a temple out of paper. A keeper sits where a keeper sit when they do not wish to be interrupted and invited anyway. Ink and cedar. Hands that do not shake. A ledger open to a page that is not the first one anyone sees. I stand where the floor asks me to. The keeper asks nothing, and in that way asks for the coin every patron pays. Posture, I pay by being the weight I am, no more. The page becomes my long enough to learn what I came to learn. Pure young flower properties listed without flattery. Heat that is not fever, light that is not sight. Volatility measured in breaths rather than hours. The margins hold other truths in smaller script. 3 known ways to hold the flower without letting it hold you. Each requires a counterweight. Stone, salt water. The stone is sun minus buried ore, a mineral that cooled under pressure and remembers it. The salt is iron heart, dug where bloodstone veined a mountain now chewed by markets. The water is not water, it is a pattern of breath, taught in a line that refuses to write its name. I leave with a pattern because breath is always available if you are, and with a map that does not admit to being a map. The keeper's eyes follow the space above my left shoulder as I go, which is a way of saying I am watched without making me feel like prey. Outside, the noon gate dissolves into ordinary. He presses the world flat for a while. The clinic breathes on its own. Now it will survive the afternoon without my hands telling it what to do. The pure young flower sits where I left it, not offended. The resource boards line the stair to the outer ring like a row of polite beggars. Contracts written by committees and affixed by people who enjoy glue. A red minus in posting carries the kind of daring that suggests a sponsor is already in motion. Sun minus buried ore, small quantities accepted, provenance required. B minus ring processing priority if delivered before the moon thins. Renku Elin has men reading the same board. They read the way men read when they assume the ending is theirs and wish only to be entertained by the middle. He enjoys the sight of the posting without touching it. He enjoys the idea that the ground will be the kind he likes. He enjoys the thought that I saw him enjoying both. The sky minus colored robe finds my shoulder before I decide whether the afternoon belongs to Erin's or mine. She carries the mantle, not wearing it. Weather and meaning both worn. She says the word kill in the way people say home when home was not kind and taught them anyway. Her teacher will not bless a dissent but will not forbid it if I sign the line that keeps the sex liability tight. A sponsor has already agreed to supply that line. I sign because breath is cheaper than paperwork and I prefer to pay my own costs. The hinged disciple arrives by coincidence that smells like arrangement. He brings two things worth more than muscle. A map that will not lie unless asked kindly, and a habit of doing what his hips tell him without resenting the message. He names a third. A porter with a back like a door and the quiet that strong, useful people develop when they have nothing left to prove to the morning. We do not form a team. We walk in the same direction with the same list. The path to the kill mouths, the eastern cliffs, and then forgets to keep climbing. He tries as before light does stones where a glaze that remembers having been soft. The air tastes like iron that reconsidered, being a knife and decided to be a bowl. Sun minus buried her lives where rock learned to cool against its will and developed a talent for patience. The kiln is not a hole. It is a lesson plan written by a mountain that knows what impatience costs. The first chamber is simple to the point of insult. Stairs steps with surfaces that ask for even weight. The hinged disciple takes the lead without needing to be told. His back writes the rule as he goes. We follow the punctuation of his breath. The second chamber insists on circles. A pit yawns without promising to stop you if you slip. A walkway rings it like a thought tracing its own boundaries. Heat lifts a palm's height off the floor, persistent but polite. I teach the breath to be a wheel, not a metronome, and the wheel rolls the body across where a march would have stumbled. The third chamber claws at habits. Low ceiling, narrow walls, and desire to brace the shoulders where bracing makes a trap. The porter stalls and then catches himself, pride a half step behind awareness. I press the fingers to the space behind his heart and ask nothing, which teaches something. He melts where I would have cooled. The ceiling remains the height it is he becomes the height he needs. We collect nothing until rock says now. The ore shows itself like a shy animal, dull where it pretends to be worthless, heavy where it admits to being useful. We tease it loose with a kind of patience that looks like laziness to the untrained eye. The sky, minus colored robe holds the lamp, in the silence both. Renku Ilin's men arrive when bags are a third. No one can pretend this is coincidence anymore. They do not draw blades because stone is watching and the stone prefers witnesses. They draw forms. Weight, pressure, ownership. I draw air, circle, hinge, permission. We share the walkway in that particular way strangers do in a room offers one path and two exits, and both parties prefer the other to test the rope first. Politeness builds a bridge made of rules, and we agree to cross it without jumping until the bridge ends. The bridge ends where the mountain board of courtesy. Aside, minus tunnel narrows to a throat. He plays the same note not louder but closer to the ear. Renku Ilin steps into the throat with the confidence that earned him his title and will someday send him to meet a different kind of stone. He gestures his people into places weight would choose. He gestures me to a place weight would punish. I let the gesture stand a breath too long and then fail to understand it with a smile. The hinged disciple Ray Minus draws the map in his hips. The porter becomes a wedge the tunnel cannot object to. The sky minus colored robe lifts, the lamp just enough that shadows tell the truth again. Renku Ilin adapts. Not furniture. Good. The mountain tests us all with a tremor that refuses to be dramatic. Just long enough to change the way our feet peek in to punish those who forgot to listen. A bag slides. A hand moves. My palm finds the point where Renku Ilin's force meets the floor. I give him an inch of ground by showing it his own weight. He takes it by reflex and loses the angle that made the throat his. He hates the lesson and the way his body learns despite the mouth attached to it. No one falls. Everyone remembers something they meant to forget about gravity. The room allows the harvest to continue, which is generosity for rock. We haul until prude and outvotes greed. The exit returns to being a promise the mountain intends to keep. Air that had smelled like iron remembers how to be air. Daylight is a rumor that's Kim believes. The mouth of the kill opens us into a world where blue does not pretend to be anything else. Renku Ilin counts our bags with an expression he thinks is blank. He counts his own. He calculates whether punishing us now is cheaper than letting the sect take its cut of to deliveries. He decides to let the market do his work for him and manage the message later. He praises my sense of timing without using my name and leaves before gratitude can contaminate his day. We carry the way adults carry useful weight. Close, low, without letting it argue with the breath. The processing your deeds rock into numbers and spits out ledger lines. The clerk with the damp voice meets us with procedures sharp enough to cut rope. Paperwork requires the kind of patience breath has already taught. We sign where ink asks, not where anyone points. The Treasury receives a portion without admitting it enjoys the taste. The clinic receives approval to keep the rest for internal use provided the audit smiles at the form. The audit declines to smile and instead decides to verify. A seal is broken to prove the ore is not cleverly disguised gravel. The blade minus and minus cloth appears out of a shadow that did not exist to blinks earlier and tests the ore by listening to it with her hands. She hears pressure where pressure lived, patience where patience spade, and stamps a mark that smells of citrus and iron. Procedure blesses us. Blessing tastes like permission written by someone who is paid to believe in ink. Night brings the flower box and the ore into a conversation either needs to raise its voice to win. The celestial body refining scripture does not recite itself. It suggests. Heat must meet, heat without declaring war cool must follow without acting like surrender. The stone sits in a basin of water that is not water but a pattern of breath-given shape. The flower remains in its own room. I sit between them and do my only job. Ratio. I ask the old wound for its name. It answers with a temperature rather than a word. I feed it a measure. The ore knows how to hold on behalf of things that burn too easily. The body chooses to be a kiln correct enough that bricks baked today will not crumble in winter. Sleep comes like a ledger that finally knows which lines belong to which column. Morning writes receipts. The hinged disciple brings tea that tastes like metal thinking better of itself. The porter asks, without asking, whether his back may keep lifting for people who have not paid yet. The sky, minus-colored robe reports that the sponsor's fan moved one set news of the ore and then stopped on a point that suggests either satisfaction or appetite. People with fans enjoy the ambiguity. The clinic's door takes more footprints than it used to. Some of them belong to the people I meant to treat. Some belong to eyes that rank you ill in loyalty and are not yet sure how many kinds of loyalty exist. I treat them all the same. Heat where heat must go, breath where breath refuses to, names left in the hall with boots. We gather salt because stone is not enough and breath is not water. Ironheart comes from a market that learned to act poor, so the rich would feel safer buying there. A woman with hands like Will minus oiled hinges sells me a bag that would have cost more if the sponsor's token were not visible where I did not quite mean to show it. She chooses not to notice me choosing not to notice. We are friends for the length of a transaction and a little beyond. I test the salt against the ore the way one introduces colleagues who are hired for the same job. They acknowledge each other without liking, which is professional. The flower stays in its room, not sulking, simply choosing not to risk any misreading of its presence. Rumor corrects itself by evening. The arena crowd that admired control learns, a new word for leverage when the clinic opens at dawn most days, and not on others according to a schedule no one can purchase but everyone can discover by paying attention. Information becomes coin as surely as coin becomes air. On the second descent to the kiln, the mountain is in a different mood. It asks 4 patients in the first room instead of the third. It insists on straight lines where yesterday it celebrated circles. People who train only their bodies resent such changes. People who train breath accept them like weather and a chance to own a good coat. We harvest less and carry it home with more gratitude. On the way out, a messenger with a new robe in the same gray finds the sky, minus colored mantle with a note that smells faintly of book mold and noon. The library would like to see the ore in a controlled room, which is clerk talk for a box with guards that you are invited to pretend are not there. The controlled room is cooler than it needs to be. The keeper sets a piece of ore on a table that seems carved from one thought. He listens to it with a tool that is nothing more than a ring with a memory. The ring hums where patient rock sings. He does not look at me when he says he has heard this song in one other place. Eternal retribution, Cliff. The breath measures itself without pretending this news is a surprise. The night pays attention without asking to be let in. I ask how. The cliff sings to a ring with a memory. The keeper almost smiles. He says names that books like are poor handles for things that hate being carried. He does not ask why I know what the cliff sounds like without him telling me. He does not need the answer the way people needing answers claim too. He warns me that or is loyal to pressure and will follow the largest gravity in the room if people let it. He advises me to be the largest gravity without appearing to be. He stamps a permit that reads like advice and folds like a warning. Back outside, the sponsor's steward waits where people with stewards like them too wait. Visible to those who matter, invisible to those who count. He offers a choice dressed as courtesy. An introduction to a forge that does not overheat the world, or an introduction to a patron who collects people who can move heat without leaving fingerprints on it. I choose the forge first because patrons are 4 days when the breath has fewer unaccounted edges. The forge smells like bread in battle. Bellows move, the way lungs wish to move when they are not required to perform. A smith with 4 arms like the pillars of arguments watches me the way I watch people trying to decide if pain is a friend. She does not test me with talk. She tests the ore with heat disciplined enough to remember who is in charge. We temper small slivers into something that looks decorative and is not. The slivers become anchors, not shackles. Points the body can ask to share the work when it forgets what muscle group learned what lesson. The scripture likes the idea and pretends it was its own. I embed one sliver close to the old wound, in the place where the sword's letter wrote itself in heat and never learned it to leave. It hums once like a child told a story it recognizes without knowing why. The breath expands around it, as water will when given a better shore. Renku Ilin's shadow crosses the forge mouth before his body arrives. He praises the smell and the idea of restraint as if praising restraint were the same as practicing it. He notes that sponsors grow bored when projects stabilize. He wonders whether I intend to entertain anyone before the week ends. I name the audit and the ledger and the piece of paper that will either call this place a clinic or demand to be paid with my time. He admires the neatness of problems that can be solved by stamps. He offers to complicate mine into something interesting if neatness tires me. I allow the offer to pass me like wind that wanted to be a hand. He has no patience for being air. He goes. The sky minus scullered robe returns her attention to the wrist she no longer mentions because it no longer mentions itself. She brings news the way people bring water to a table, place where everyone can reach it without someone having to hold it. The sponsors fan moved at a rumor that the medical hall intends to file an objection to any clinic that does not subordinate to its language. The fan then stopped when told that subordination would make me less interesting. Interest is not love. It is not loyalty. It is a kind of weather. Plan anyway. 2 days until the audit window closes. The clerk with the damp voice sharpens quills like swords. The scribe's brush has learned my name and writes it without disliking the way it's on the page. The blade minus in minus cloth reads forms without moving her lips and asks a single question without asking it aloud. What will you be for the sect if we give you a number? Useful is the only honest answer. Dangerous is the one I do not say because someone else will say it for me if I seem to enjoy the sound. Night brings the flour and the ore and the salt into a room where breath can count without slipping. I let the scripture pick a path that does not need me to be heroic. Sweat marks a map on my skin that admits to having rivers. He climbs and is invited to sit. Nothing flares. Nothing collapses. The old wound becomes a door that can be closed from the inside. The clinic opens to a line that is less afraid of being seen admitting to need. Adults breathe. Adults learn that pain is a terrible landlord and a decent teacher. Rumor carries that sentence farther than my sigh never will. At noon, a library's gate does not open. Noon is a habit, not a law. I sit with the fact, the way one sits with a friend who changed plans and forgot to tell you. The friendship matters enough that the schedule doesn't. The audit arrives with less music this time, which is a kind of compliment. The authority with the shoulder carries it better. The blade minus in minus cloth sets a seal on the table and waits for me to put my hand where mine belongs. The scribe looks pleased by the thought of a number printed cleanly. I sign where ink wants to live. They stamp where the sect wishes the world to see its order. The provisional becomes a license people can argue with instead of me. The clinic becomes odd, or that remains a door even when I am away. Renku Ilin congratulates me with a challenge shaped like a handshake. He proposes a joint venture in a secret realm that will open for 3 days in a gorge that forgets the sect exists. He says the words that mean race without naming it. He suggests there is a resource inside that prefers to be carried by hands that persuade rather than threaten. He looks at my hands and then at his own. I accept not to help him, not to please the sponsor, not to prove anything to a library that may or may not open tomorrow. I accept because doors that test whether you are still the person you became last week should be walked through while the question is fresh. The sign hangs straight in a wind that does not visit the colonnade. The flower sleeps without sulking. The ore cools, the way patience does when it knows it will be needed again very soon. The breath counts itself and finds no missing numbers. We leave at dawn. Dawn makes promises it doesn't plan to keep. We shoulder packs that weigh less than intentions and take the east road where the sect forgets to sweep. Mist lays a hand on the gorge and then withdraws as if trusting us to behave. Renku Ilin arrives flanked by 2 fighters who admire the idea of being scenery. The hinge disciple and the porter walk with me, because breathing is easier when people know where to put their feet. The sky, minus colored mantle, keeps space without borrowing anyone's shadow. The mouth of the realm looks like a crack old stone learned to be proud of. 3 markers hang from an iron line. Bone, bronze, silk. Choose your door. Bone promises straightforward tests and simple injuries. Bronze offers rules that like to be read twice. Silk is for people who believe in persuasion. Renku Ilin chooses bone. It suits him. I choose silk because the fan in my pocket warms a fraction and because breath prefers fabric to fences. Inside, the air holds itself together like a sentence. The floor is a weave, not a path. Threads strung across empty space that deepens when you consider it. Step wrong and the thread hums enough in something that lives below remembers you exist. The first rule of silk is rhythm. We spread weight in time rather than space. The mantle matches me without watching. The hinge disciple learns faster than his pride expected. The The porter does what strong people do when they decide not to argue with physics. He listens, and then he obeys. Halfway across, minus breeze pretends it arrived by chance. The threads shift pitch. The mantle's wrist tightens at the memory of obsession and does not. I take her fair arm above the old wrap and set the breath wheel under our feet, not in our chests. The thread sighs. We pass. Silk opens into a hall with neither walls nor ceiling, just a place where light forgot to pick a direction. A stand sits at the center, cradling nothing. The mantle names it a courtesy altar. You leave what you cannot live without and ask for it back later. The realm decides whether you understood your own request. Ringu Elan's laugh drifts from the bone or like a promise to someone else. I set the box with the flower on the stand. The breath in the room notices without becoming a thief. The mantle places her mantle collar folds into quiet. The hinged disciple lays down his token stake. The porter sets his pride on the table and pretends he misheard what anyone would call it. We walk on with lighter hands. Silk's second rule is consent. Doors open when they decide you will not make them regret. A corridor tightens until it is a sleeve the stone underfoot carries a pulse, not ours. The mantle shoulder brushes mine because geometry insists. The air cools a degree, the skin warms to match. Two breaths overlap until they decide not to fight for the same room. Intimacy arrives as efficiency, stays as attention, leaves without debt. A soundless bell moves through the corridor. Threads appear where wall was. We follow a line that leads in a circle, trusting the circle to end where it began. It does, but the beginning is a different room. The quiet timber waits, their inside lantern of glass and lit and luminous. It is not flame. It is heat that negotiated with the world and kept its temper. The scripture inside my ribs leans forward the way a student does when a teacher finally draws the diagram that matches the thing itself. Ringu Elan's path breaks into ours from a side arch that does not admit to being one. Bones graduates, come out shining with sweat and satisfaction. Their eyes go to the lantern as if money had learned it to sit still. He smiles with his mouth and then sets it aside because silk has rules even people who like bone must honor. The lantern is not guarded by locks. It is guarded by proportion. Whoever carries it must not need it to be what they are missing. Whoever carries it must not love it more than they love where it is going. It prefers to be asked, the mantle says. Then ask, Ringu Elan replies, inviting me to prove my choices in front of his audience. I don't speak. I offer the breath that learned how not to scratch. I offer a heat they are taught to behave. I let my hands be bowls and not nets. The lantern warms my palms without burning them. Inside, the ember pulses as if hearing a story it recalls from before it was named. It agrees to travel. The glass remains cool. Ringu Elan calls it luck so his people remember whom to credit when their backs are to him. I call it timing because gratitude and math share bones. Day 1 finishes without anyone falling. Day 2 begins by making that look like a mistake. The silk hall withdraws courtesy the whale ender removes a chair. Thread space farther wind arrives insisting on its right to rearrange conversations. We lash ourselves by habit rather than fear. The porter anchors lines as if tying arguments to posts. The hinged disciple learns to step where there is no step yet, and to be grateful when a step chooses to exist under him. At the second span, a shriek climbs the gorge wall. Metal on rock, bone on stubbornness, whatever music pride makes when gravity edits it. Bones path through someone back. Ringu Elan appears across a gap with one fighter and a rope, the second fighter missing and already reduced to story. He does not ask for help. He drafts it by naming the gap a test of the clinic's generosity. I throw a line because the clinic is not a theory. The mantle braces. The porter leans into the load with the face of a man who hates funerals. The hinged disciple becomes a hinge instead of a hero. Ringu Elan comes across with a gratitude shaped like a debt. He'd rather not owe. His fighter comes across with hands that want to learn and knees that don't. We rest in a bowl of rock where wind finally admits it cannot live. The ember sits between us, lantern a small moon with patient weather. Ringu Elan watches it the way men watch lakes they wish were theirs. He speaks of a second prized eperin. The accord thread, a length of woven breath taken from storms and put to work as medicine. He suggests we split. He suggests whoever reaches the thread first owes the other nothing but a nod. Or, I say, we leave with both and owe the gorge less. He hears the insult and decides it's a compliment. He takes Bone's side path, leaves us silk. Silk answers arrogance with puzzles. A room made of echoes requires you to say nothing until you mean it. The mantle almost laughs, then doesn't, which is how adults keep trust from turning into theater. The hinged disciple thinks of weight and chooses a sentence with 2 verbs and no pride. The porter says nothing and wins because silence spoken on purpose is a contribution. The accord thread is not hung, it is taught. You learn a sequence, it decides if you understood or merely performed. We watch a weave that leads nowhere unless hands settle into a cadence older than urgency. The mantle's fingers find it first. Mine follow. The thread lays itself across our palms with the weight of a promise someone kept before we were born. On the way out, bone and silk intersect again as bureaucracy always promised they would. Renkyu Ilin stands where the wind draws a line through his hair and looks pleased to see us mostly because we are not dead. He declares that the realm has begun to close the flags outside sunk by a finger width and the air tastes like goodbye. We must leave by dusk on the third day or stay until whoever writes maps changes their mind again next season. Leaving is the easiest and hardest part of such places. The realm remembers every step you took and asks whether you would like to take them backward as well. People who confuse nostalgia with direction agree. We disagree. We walk a different way out, paying each room with the lesson it taught rather than the one we brought. At the courtesy altar, our things return as themselves but improved. A flower that has decided to forgive light for being dramatic, a mantle that knows where breath lives at the wrist token, that bends less when pride leans on it, a pride that learned to sit at the table and pass dishes instead of hoard them. The lantern hums once in approval at our restraint and then becomes an object again because objects do not like being seen as people for long. Outside, dusk has sharpened its edges. The sect looks far away even though the road clips the same stones. Renkyu Ilin keeps stride with me for 10 steps because pretending we are not walking together would tire everyone. He remarks the clinic stays for things that don't bruise to prove they were real. I remark Bone's desire to leave a mark on whatever it touches. We decide both languages pay their rent if spoken where they belong. The intake drum sounds like a heart that read a good letter. Back inside the order of ledgers and stamps, everything feels smaller, which is how safety introduces itself. The treasury weighs the ember with a scale that prefers coin and admits ignorance by issuing reverence instead. The medical hall sends a representative who tries very hard to dislike what the lantern makes her pulse do. The sponsor's fan moves once when told we also brought thread. Then it rests at a point that means move carefully but do move. Renkyu Ilin petitions to house the ember in a hall with his name on it for a season. I petition for the Heavenly Clinic to hold it on rotation so adults without titles can meet their breath without paying a title tax. Procedure invents a compromise that equals neither request. The ember will reside at a neutral forge accessible by license. Licenses will be issued to places that demonstrate proportion. Audits will measure proportion. Auditors will be people with hands like blades and eyes that know when to sheath themselves. The blade minus and minus cloth stamps the compromise with ink that smells like iron and citrus. She meets my eyes for the first time since B minus ring and gives me the smallest tilt of chin, as if to say you asked for something measurable, now live inside being measured. I bow because bows are useful. Renkyu Ilin bows because he knows when not to fight the room. The hall exhales. Night folds itself around the forge that will keep the ember. The smith tests it with heat the way a teacher tests a proverb it holds to sense. We thread a wire through the lantern's ring and fix it where breath can warm its glass without turning it into worship. Exhausts people. Respect hires them back in the morning. I return to the clinic at an hour that likes closed doors. The sign remembers the wind. The mat remembers the hour I owed myself. The flower box sits with the patience of a kept promise. I set the accord thread beside the scripture and feel both listen to the other. The oar in my side hums once, agreeing to a workload it had not imagined yesterday. The mantle comes to the colonnade as if walking meant thinking, and she had things to think. She stands at the beam the way she did the first day, except now the beam knows her. She speaks of teachers who admire results and of students who confuse admiration with permission. She does not ask for treatment. She asks for time. We take it without explaining the terms. Breath as wheel. Heat as gust. The wrist that once shouted now negotiates. Shoulders drop the width of a word learned correctly. Distance sits down between us and behaves itself. Morning makes another set of promises. The clinic opens 2 lines that include people I have met and ideas I have not. The audit returns with a form that names the ember a public good and the clinic a private door that opens into a public room. The clerk with the damn voice enjoys filing language that says exactly what it means. Renkyu Ilin sends no challenge. He sends a box of tea with a respectful note and a sentence that can be read 2 ways. I read it both and reply with nothing, which mistakes no one for weakness. The sponsor's steward appears, admiring the sign without appearing to read it. He says the fan is pleased and that interest, for once, is not a threat, but an invitation. There is a dinner where people who have never boiled their own water decide which doors the sect will call oars next season. He wonders whether I wish to attend. The clinic has evening hours, I say. He nods, as if that were exactly the answer he hoped for. Bring them, he says, meaning the hours, the mantle, the hinge in a disciple's back, the oar humming under skin, the breath that learned to count. Bring whatever makes a room behave. I consider the ledger. I consider the flower whose light has become a habit my body understands. I consider an ember sitting in a forge where hands come to remember fire and leave without burns. After the last patient, I say. He bows. The day moves forward. Between pulses, the scripture unrolls a step it had been saving. Not power, proportion, strength that does not arrive as noise. I test it on a shoulder that lied to its owner and watched the light go out like a lamp whose oil was miscounted. The sect, for a moment, feels aligned in the way that makes adults lower their voices to let the day keep working. Then the clerk runs. He does not run often. He dislikes what that does to his ink. He arrives breathless and therefore honest. A seal broke in a room that locks itself, he says. The forge's door is open. The lantern is missing. The ember left with someone who did not ask. Silence finds the colonnade like wither. The sign lifts and stops. The mantle's eyes close and open. The ore under my skin cools on purpose. Rank you ill and will hear in a breath. The sponsor will know in two. The audit will arrive with stamps and then with blades. The heavenly clinic remains a door. I step through it. The forge smells wrong before anyone speaks. Heat without a heart. Iron cooling to politely. People stand in the posture of blame. Elbows locked, voices clipped to fit through doorways. The lantern's hook holds no weight. A bright circle on the beam says where it should be and is not. The smith points at a seal that should have been unbroken and is. She does not accuse me. She accuses the world of teaching hands to look like keys. The clerk with the damp voice names codes and countersigns and a watch rota that looks good on a board. The blade minus and minus cloth arrives without footsteps and lays a thin strip of wax across the threshold. See what dare pass again. I walk the room as if the floor kept it airy and might lend it. Breath rounds. The ember would not have left quietly. If offended, it would have left like weather. There is no burn. There is warmth knotted in the air like a held note. Something that is not fire practice, not being seen. The mantle stands at my shoulder, mantle in her hands, as if choice were an instrument and she'd learned to play it. Vince, she says. Not a question. The smith nods toward a square of lattice near the ceiling where heat breathes into the city. The accord thread feels like modesty in the palm. I fix one into the vent, let the other lay across my face, eyelids lowered to give the world back to sound and pressure. Thread tells stories. Tiny pulses where air changed its mind. A rhythm out of time with the bellows. A human breath teaching itself to be a draft. I follow it into the corridor where carts forget to squeak when shifts end. Stone holds on to someone's hurry, the waistkin keeps a mark where a shoulder pressed too long. I do not run. I let breath pull like a tide rather than push like a flood. The hinged disciple moves at my back, stepping where I stepped as if the floor were a sentence we are careful not to misread. The porter becomes it or the world is grateful to have. The thread hums over a grill above the alley. The alley hums back. Steam, oil, a hint of resin, and the cheap incense people use when better air is expensive. I touch metal with the back of my hand. Warmth but patient warmth, traveling inside a makeshift sleeve. A thing that should not like confinement behaving because proportion convinces it for now. East, the mantle says, smelling resin the way a musician hears a single false string. We take east. Markets hate being awake at the wrong hour. Stalls lean like men who fell asleep sitting up. A girl, 18 and sharp enough to never be mistaken for less, hops a rope and pretends not to see us. The thread catches a tremor under the cobbles and sings through my fingers. Underfoot, not street minus level. Service tunnel. I kneel where grind disguises, a latch no one bothered to hide from anyone who respects dirt. The porter lifts the panel like it insulted him. Warm draft kisses our faces from below. The thread confirms. The note matches the forge. We go. Tunnel air tastes of iron and bookkeeping. Walls close enough to make shoulders admit their size. The mantle's breath brushes my cheek, not because she forgot where she is, but because the tunnel insists. He gathers in knots along the right wall, then left. Someone carrying the lantern close, and then farther, rotating responsibility from one side of the body to the other like a disciplined thief. Footfalls ahead, then the lack of them that means someone heard their own and learned fear. The hinged disciple stops one pace behind me. The porter's palms open and close, remembering weight and deciding on generosity instead. We turn a bend into a pool of light. 3 figures. 2 in workman's wraps and 1 in a robe that spent money pretending not to. The lantern sits inside a metal sling lined with pale clay, heat shimmering above it like the thought of breath. The carrier's arms buzz with the hum of something carried correctly. He did not steal this indiscriminately. He is an expert at not belonging to punishment. The workmen move to block the corridor, faces set to polite. The robe's eyes go over my shoulder to count who I brought and who I didn't. He waits for me to speak, which is how men who like rooms to obey them pretend to be generous. I nod to the sling. Too tight, I say. Clay will crack before your courage does. He smiles without his eyes. We're nearly home. The mantle repeats, listening to the word for keys hidden in it. He shifts his grip. That's more. The sling complains softly, an animal told to behave longer than is fair. The ember prefers proportion, I tell him. It will behave for any hand that remembers that, including yours, including mine. But tunnels take air as a tax, and your carrier is paying more than he thinks. He does not look at the carrier. There is a rule at work here. Do not see the strain you require. He tells the workmen to invite us to leave. The invitation arrives in the shape of cudgels that wish to be arguments. The corridor has no room for arguments. I show the first man a corner where his stance forgot to be real. The cudgel writes its own letter to the floor. The second lifts, his weapon, in a line I recognize from a yard that trains pride my palm brushes his wrist and tucks the line back into the elbow it came from. His breath hears a better idea and agrees. The robe shows teeth at last. You claim care, and you break wrists. No breaks, I say. The men check and discover their bones are intact and their stories altered. Politeness drains from their faces, replaced by respect they will cash later. The robe nods once, as if endorsing an invoice. He tips the carrier's chin with 2 fingers as if showing me a piece of evidence. The carrier is younger than the voice at his back. 20 maybe, adult enough to choose and to be chosen by people who reward obedience. His arms tremble where the sling touches tendon. Almost home, the robe repeats, not for me, for the man bearing the weight he requisitioned. Home, where? I ask the tunnel. Air answers with a weak draft and a rumor of incense that costs less than honesty. The medical hall side passages breathe like this when they are pretending to be storerooms. I do not say it aloud. The mantle has already put the scent in her pocket. Let's trade, I say instead. I carry 4 10 breaths. He carries for none. If your home is close, your face will still look like this when we arrive. The robe laughs once at the insolence of arithmetic. He does not forbid me. He cannot. If the ember misbehaves, he is the man in the room who should have known about proportion. I step in. The carrier does not want to surrender what he's carried this far. I respect the truth of that. I respect it more than the man behind him. I slide a palm under the sling where he gathers, ask breath to be a bowl, not a mouth. The ember listens the way an old teacher listens to a student who finally switched from reciting to speaking. Its pulse finds mine, the hum in my ribs answers. Weight shifts. The sling comes to me without drama. Clay eases with a sound I have heard from rope let down slowly instead of dropped. The corridor continues to be itself. 10 breaths, I say. We walk. The mantle at my side, the hinged disciple behind us, the porter at our back, the workmen choosing not to regret their wrists, the robe close enough to lend authority to the air. He sits in the sling with the behavior of a cat who decided to accept the lap without admitting to having one. I count without counting. On 9, the ember murmurs a preference. Up, not down. The corridor slopes. The medical hall breathes above, smelling like solutions and rules and rivalry with the forge. The robe's expression reveals that he sees the world the same height I do right now. Up, he says, too quickly. Then left. Or I say up and straight through the courtyard where auditors walk for the sake of being seen walking. Proportion loves light. Your clinic loves audiences, he replies. This is medicine. This is civics, I say. And medicine happens there, or it becomes a shop for men who own rooms. He is deciding whether to hate me now or later when the blade minus and minus cloth voice walks in ahead of her body. Up, she says from the darkness ahead. Then straight. Then we find out whose license is bigger than whose story. The robe makes a calculation that tries to involve only numbers and fails. He dips his head as if bowing to wisdom when he's bowing to a badge. The workmen adjust to the new gravity. We climb into afternoon framed by stone and procedure. The courtyard receives us like a hand that can hold oil and water without deciding for them. The clerk arrives with a book held like a shield. Treasury officials materialize at a pace that says they were nearer than anyone likes. The sponsor steward occupies a corner of shade as if that corner had always belonged to him. The blade minus, in minus cloth, draws a line on flagstones with chalk and names the law she writes with it. Neutrality, public witness, right of swift verification. The robe speaks softly, which is a way to make a crowd lean. The ember is volatile, he says. Display invites disaster. Volatility, I say, is a word people use when proportion is not on their side. I do not lift the sling above my hip. I do not make a show. I set the lantern on the chalk line so its light belongs to the law. He tries as a finger's height, polite again. The glass does not fog. The clay does not sweat. The ember behaves the way a promise behaves when kept. The blade minus in minus cloth places her palm above the lantern, not touching, not daring. Her breath tightens, then opens. The involuntary knowledge of someone's body recognizing a thing's name. She stamps twice. The wax on the seal tastes siren to the air. License remains with the forge, she says. Custody rotates according to the schedule already posted. Any hall with standing may apply to host under the proportion clause. Her eyes cut to the robe, but not while transporting through a private tunnel with a broken seal. He takes the reprimand as if it had been his idea. He opens his mouth to argue jurisdiction. The steward coughs a word without coughing a sound. Optics. The robe closes his mouther and the taste of the day and swallows. I turn to the carrier. He looks younger now that the thing he carried is the room's problem. His arm shake as the hum quiets, as a chorus that has been singing for hours learns what silence cost. I nod to him and to the workmen whose wrists remember my palm. They nod back because manners survive strained loyalties. The blade minus and minus cloth writes in the scribes. Place the scribe watches her strokes like a student too proud to admit delight. The clerk calibrates forms to say exactly what they must and not one syllable extra. The sponsor steward remains where the shade behaves and makes no comment about fans. Renku Ilin arrives when any later would tarnish the timing. He appraises the courtyard as if it had dared to be interesting without him. He sees the lantern on the chalk and the way no one is bleeding, and he laughs with his eyes. Proportion, he says, trying on the word to see if it fits his jaw. It's fashionable. Fashion keeps bad ideas from going naked, I say. He enjoys that. He enjoys most things that let him pretend he meant to enjoy them all along. When the stamp's dry, the lantern returns to the forge behind a fence made of eyes. The rogue calculates what he gained anyway. Witnesses to his concern for the public good, a rumor that the medical hall is close enough to matter. He files me under men to be rewritten later and bows a fraction to the blade minus in minus cloth, who doesn't notice because her attention is on my breath. Come to dinner, the steward says after the crowd finishes deciding what it's all. Bring your hours. Bring the word proportion and let it drink. The clinic closes at dusk, I reply. Open at dawn, he says, as if dawn were a thing that could be promised. We will not keep you past the time when breath wants to become wheel again. The mantle's glance reads the ledger I haven't written yet. The hinged disciple shifts in place the way men do when asked to wear a robe in a room with carpets. The poor will go or not, the work respects what builds clinics more than what builds rooms that name the world. After the last patient, I say, the dinner is a game that takes spitty on rooms and lets them be gardens for a while. Lanterns the right size for human attention. Water that admits to being water and not an allegory. People with title sashes who pretend to forget them when plates arrive. The sponsor holds court without insisting on the word for it. Fans still, which means we are either doing well or being measured for something more expensive than soups. Renku Ilin prowls edges until the eddies laid him to currents. The medical hall sends a different robe in a different shade with the same habit of weighing air before deciding if it belongs to him. Your clinic has a voice, someone says as my bowl finds a home. It traveled fast. Pain promotes what heals it, I answer. Faster than rumor. Rumor tastes better at tables. The sponsor replies, amused by the sentence as if it had chosen a good chair. Tell us yours. I do not tell them about cliffs or swords or knights that followed me across borders. I tell them a clinic opened by steam for adults who breathe. I tell them it traded bleeding for timing, arrogance for hinges, secrets for licenses, and days for proportion. I tell them we plan to remain it or when rooms forget their doors. Renku Ilin fills the silence that follows with a toast to stability. The robe toast to oversight that doesn't wear a mask. The blade minus in minus cloth raises water, not wine, and lets silence be her agreement. The sponsor lets the fan move once. Contentment that refuses to be mistaken for sleep. Someone asks about the accord thread. I say it is a sentence length and in the right places. Someone else asks about, or I say it remembers pressure and will remember not to be cruel with that memory. Someone asks what I plan to grow from clinic to hall. I say doors do not need wings to work. The sponsor watches my hands while I speak, not the colluses. The way fingers stay still when words do their work. You make rooms behave, they say later when the table forgets itself and becomes a garden again. Do you charge for that? In points, I say, or in a half day of not being inspected. They enjoy that. I can arrange both. Their fan points at the medical hall without moving. They will file language. Language will propose that anything which treats the inside of a person must be housed by those who name the inside. You will be asked to become a corridor inside their building. I prefer to be a door between buildings, as do I, they say as if admitting to a vanity. We will see which architecture survives. The mantle drinks water with the concentration of a woman keeping her breath disciplined in a room full of temptations to waste it. The hinged disciple learns where to place his gaze so power thinks he's listening to it, which is not always the same as hearing. The porter accepts a plate from a noble's hand and returns it cleaner than pride requires, which the noble will remember later for reasons that do not concern me. The dinner adjourns having decided nearly nothing and signaling almost everything. The fan rests at a point that says, remain interesting, remain clean, remain a door. Night at the colonnade is patient with people who earned it. The sign rest straight. The mat takes my back as if writing a letter to muscles that stayed civil under strain. The flower warms without boasting. The air hums compatibly with bone. The thread lies across my palm with a modesty that understands its own use. The clerk visits at an hour when ink is honest. He brings a file that smells like witnessed arguments. Medical hall petition, he says, as if introducing a relative we will be friends with in public and scowl it in kitchens. They'll make it a floor vote. There will be speeches for people who like being impressed by noises. When? I ask. 2 days, he says. Enough time to practice standing straight without becoming a statue. He leaves before I can thank him because he is a man who believes gratitude belongs to moments more private than politics. The mantle lingers by the beam. You made an enemy today, she says without judgment. I made a friend in public and an enemy in private, I say. Or the reverse. It's difficult to tell which is safer. Neither, she says. Which is why the breath learns long arcs. We fall into quiet that has work inside it. Wrist remembers hinge. Shoulders remember not guarding empty rooms. Heat agrees not to be a bully. Distance sits between us and keeps its promises. Morning brings a man who cannot tell whether fear eats in his chest or his throat. I show him how to place it under a rib for an hour and give it a window. Morning brings a woman whose knee insists on telling the story of a fall long after the body learned it. I ask the story to end in a different sentence. Morning brings the hinged disciple with a question about teaching and the porter with a promise about hours. The day walks until the floor vote calls it to heel. We go, not as a procession, but as people who have learned to stand where standing changes things. The hall where speeches happen likes to hear itself. Flags, benches, air that tastes of dust and decision. The medical hall's petitions, it's on a table as if it could not imagine itself not being passed. Speeches. One about safety that means monopoly. One about tradition that means custody. One about doors that means locks. I say little. The clerk says nothing but stands where ink can find him if it needs to. The blade minus in minus cloth watches hands instead of mouths. Renku Ilan speaks once, endorsing oversight that endorses him. The sponsor's fan does not move. The mantle's eyes are on a point no one else sees. The place where breath leaves rooms when rooms forget to let it. When my turn arrives, I do not raise my voice. I place it where people put cups when they intend to use them. The heavenly clinic treats adults who breathe, I say. It teaches the breath not to be a bully, the body not to confuse guarding with living, the mind not to spend pain like currency at every counter. It stands in a colonnade by steam because steam reminds people they are made of heat and water, not rules. We submit to audit. We turn challenges into points instead of bruises. We return stole and fire to the forge in the open. If this room wants what it says it wants, the clinic is a door. If it wants a corridor, we are the wrong shape. Silence tries to get in the last word by being silent longer than is comfortable. The sponsor relieves it by tapping the fan once. Not approval. Permission to end without malice. The vote threatens to be theater until a small thing happens. The clerk misplaces a stack of papers, finds them, and in the finding makes two elders reach at once. They smile in the same time at the same accident, at a borrowed rhythm, agree on something they hadn't planned to. Their hands go up. Others follow. The petition narrows into a compromise that smells of ink and grudging sanity. The clinic remains at or under license, not a corridor under anyone's roof. Oversight grows teeth that bite malpractice instead of curiosity. Renku Ilan accepts the result as if he had arranged it, which is his habit and will be his legend. The medical hall's robe calculates revenue in new units. The blade minus in minus cloth allows herself to breathe once as if she too were built of heat and water. The sponsor's fans tops where relief and appetite both live. We leave the way people leave when a day decided not to devour them. The signs still hang straight. The mat is still a promise someone kept. The flower glows like a thing that no longer needs to prove that it remembers light. At dusk, a messenger in gray, the boy with 2 months, now 3, arrives with a face that thinks it failed. He holds a note with a seal I have not seen. A small, careful sigil cut into wax, as if whoever cut it feared making a mistake. The message is brief. Cliff sings in the city tonight. Bring the door. The mantle reads it and does not blink. The hinged disciple blinks and then stops. The porter looks at the horizon as if testing whether gravity changed. Eternal retribution. Cliff does not move. Its song does. If it sings here, something came to listen, or something learned to answer. I close the clinic early for the first time since it remembered its hours. I leave a sign that says a different kind of work is happening and people can return in the morning and find the same door. The night that followed me across borders stands up from where I asked it to sit and stretches the way cats do when they are done pretending not to be wild. The air under my skin is quiet enough to hear the quiet. The thread hums, a line between places. We walk toward the part of the city where old stone repurposes itself into furnaces, where abandoned shrines learn to be storage rooms, where air can afford to be cold. The cliff song is pressure, not sound. Await the chest accepts before the ear responds. The mantle feels it first because wrist learned language earlier than shoulders did. The hinged disciple feels it next because hips learned to kneel without falling. The porter feels it last and best because backs know the cost of gravity and the price of relief. We stop before a building that used to be a temple to a god who liked order and incense and now prefers ledgers. Steps. Pillars that learned to be patient with birds. Doors that have seen petitions and confessions and the same posture in both. Inside, shadow holds shapes like a careful host hacking stools after guests have left. At the far wall where an altar would have been, a crack runs top to bottom, a smaller version of the mouth I left to live when I left the cliff. From the crack, cold breath. From the breath, the memory of pressure long born. Something comes through. Not a person, not an animal, a habit. The way a cliff teaches wine to be a wall. The way night teaches distance to widen when you look at it. A rhythm that stretches every room until it matches an outside too big to be inside. Door, the note said. I set the accord thread across the crack the way one sets a harp string that only honesty can pluck. I set the breath under it. I remember the exact shape of the step that takes you to the edge and not over it. Renku Ilin arrives not because I told him, but because some men sleep with one ear on the city. He takes in the room as if asked to judge a contest between silence and resignation. He does not draw a blade. He stands as if seeing whether I will be the shape I claim to be. The blade minus in minus cloth arrives because she is wherever the word proportion is about to be tested. The sponsor steward appears in a shadow that forgot to tell him no. The clerk arrives with ink that has no use here and brings it anyway, because he is faithful to his nature. The crack widens, a finger minus width, and then another. Air presses the ribs. The old letter under my sternum asks for a signature. I do not give it. I give it a counterweight. Or salt breath thread. Flower in the next room because Audit distracts. Hinge. Heat without anger. Cool without fear. The habit that is not a person listens. It wanted an answer and came to the city because cliffs keep poor company. It wanted to know whether the night it wrote into me found a hole or a hallway. I'm a door, I say without words. The pressure threads itself through the thread and finds a place to sit. The crack narrows. Night remains night, but it learns the size of this room and agrees not to break it while we are in it. Renku Ilin exhales as if he had been holding his breath and finally found a reason not to. The blade minus in minus cloth does not move, which is her version of approval. The steward will tell the sponsor the fan may move without changing places. The clerk will invent a form for this and call it something that files. The city learns the song without inheriting the cliff. The mantle's hand finds my sleeve and then does not need to. The hinge disciple stands a fraction taller. The porter's back decides to be a bridge again in the morning and not tonight. We walk out into air that has the right ideas again. Behind us, the temple decides whether to turn to ledgers or to wait for a god who is learning to be a room. The clinic sign hangs where I left it. The mat does what it always does. The flower warms itself into being a habit I can trust. The ledger adds a line I did nothing to ask it to. A city that learned proportion for an hour and liked the taste. Dawn will arrive and lie to someone. It will not lie to the door,